Oh, hey, so now we're going to explore a few more techniques on that new method for scaling up, upscaling. And in fact, I have a picture in mind, maybe something like this, or this one here. If we look at that picture, it's got a lot of fine detail. And let's say we wanted to retain some of that as we increase the size, as we upsample. And what can happen if you go to very extremes. If let's say here where the ears are, if you zoom into that, you can see it's starting to get a little bit blurry and jaggedy, and well, it retains some of it, but it also loses quite a bit of it, of that detail. So in the picture, there is some more information about similar shapes and similar patterns. And so what I'm going to do is work on that and see if we can get something. I'm going to paste it right in here as a new picture and make it a little bit smaller. This is actually no, not yet. We'll scale it down after we've cropped to the portion of interest. So I'm going to use the crop tool this time. You could do this in a couple of ways, like there's the rectangle selection tool, right, or even an oval tool to select. You could say I want to roughly focus on this part here, right? And then what it does, if you say crop to that selection, there it is, crop to selection, it will look at a bounding box containing the outline of that entire selection and crop to that. I want it a little bit bigger though. So I'm going to use the rectangle selection tool and say, give me the tips of these ears as well. Something like here and maybe this much. All right, so I'm going to crop to that. But instead of doing this here with crop to selection, I can also do that directly with the crop tool. So let me clear, Control D to clear the entire selection, and simply go to the crop tool. There it is. And the crop tool will resize the image to fit the entire screen. And I'm going to select a portion. We may be off. There may be a bug here by 1 pixel, by the way, because it looked like 3,999, when I think it's a 4,000 pixel image. We can see that here. Where is it? Under the, not the brush menu, the image menu, image info. Yeah, it is 4,000 by 300,000. So the width is off by 1 pixel. I think here we may want to fix that, because also if I set it to, let's say 1781, it's actually going to be 1780. I need to compensate for that ahead of time. But that's okay. That's a minor detail, right? Who cares about a pixel? In this day and age, you have bigger problems than pixels. Anyway, let's go select that, crop to that. And so now here's the image that we want to use, and it's not super high quality. I think he moved his head a little bit. It was low lighting, so it got a little bit of a motion blur there, perhaps. And but still, let's see what we can do. Let's store that image. Let's also make sure it's kind of in interesting dimensions, maybe something close to what you want to use. Actually, no, not yet, because we will resize that anyway at some point. So the first technique here is, if we look at the current dimension, we can see that when we resample it, right? If we say resample, that's going to make the picture bigger, and right now it's showing as 1909. And let's say we want to make it twice as big, so double size, now 38, yada yada. Okay, so open that, and now we have this higher resolution picture, but it's a little bit more blurry and a little bit lesser quality if you look at the fine details. Now, when I print this, my vision is not that good. I may not be able to notice that, but I know the professionals will prefer to see something a little bit better. So I'm going to go and store this one and then go back to this guy, which is still the half size or quarter number of pixels. So I'm going to actually restore it right here. New document, lose the old one. There you go. So now I have that small one back in there. And I'm going to use instead a different technique, which is analytical upscale, right? And what that does is kind of similar, if you want to understand. Let's go to create an animation. Create an animation. We don't need many, just like 3 frames. And creating an animation, why? Because I want to show you this thing here. Under the animated menu, there's a thing called motion prediction module. And the way the motion prediction module it helps in understanding how this one works. The analytical upscale has some analogies here, analytical analogies, no pun intended. Their dry run is what I'm going to do. Actually, I don't even need to do a dry run. Just looking at, there's a thing called the search distance here. And what you can see is that it basically shows how far it's going to look for certain squares of similar content. And what size are the squares? You see that here, the grid spacing, right? So if you make, these are small squares actually. If we zoom in a little bit better, I'll see them more. So for the motion tracker or the motion estimated interpolation, we have all these little squares get attached to a tracker, and then the tracker is going to look for the next frame. Where has it gone? What's the closest one that we can find around a starting position of each of these trackers? There's a huge amount of calculations, right? But each tracker, each square is going to be a candidate to look for nearby. How far do we look? Well, that's what you adjust here, right? But basically, it's looking for a square of the closest match, right? The one that's similar, the most similar to the current starting point. And we do that for each of these squares so that we can see what type of motion has been occurring on these little squares. And let's say if I'm doing just a horizontal sweep from the left to the right, all of these will have moved from the left to the right by the same amount, and we will have a nice interpolation of that. But if they change other things like color, lighting, shape, zoom, size, and so on, it can track that too. Within limits, within a certain amount of distance, and you control that, but also within limits in terms of how different is too much difference, right? But if it's similar enough, if it finds the one that's the closest match, the motion prediction module works magic there for that. Now, we're not going to do the motion estimated interpolation, so I'm going to free the animation here. Done with that. That was just for explaining. What we're doing now is scaling with some intelligent thinking about what to put in there as the replacement after we scaled it, right? When we resample, it's a bilinear interpolation or a bicubic, or there's a couple of different ways to resample it. And you can see here actually what the algorithm is we should use, right? And that could stay blocky with the nearest neighbor. You could make it, a couple of different levels of quadratic or cubic interpolation, but it's still going to be just taking a look at only the pixels in that little square or that entire picture and enhance it or make it bigger and then blur it a little bit as it's smoothing it. And what we're trying to do is just the opposite. We want to make it bigger, but we want to keep it crisp. And so the question is, well, where does the information come from about how crisp it's going to stay? Well, that comes not necessarily from that little square at a time, but from the neighboring squares, right? So you think of something like this here. We're going to scale up by using, let me see if I have a small size there. We're going to split this up into little squares, kind of similar to that grid we saw on the motion prediction module. So imagine something like this. And then for each of those, let's say for this one here, we're going to see where is a similar pattern that we can gain some additional insights from, well, that looks crisp, let's use that, or has the same color, or has the same shapes, the same patterns. So some information there, correlations that tell it, well, if we go bigger to that, we might still use that as well as a basis for additional information on how to make it better. Exactly what the algorithm is behind that, I couldn't tell you. But the concept here is what's interesting. To just understand that we have more than just that picture. We have neighboring pictures, right? If we slice it into small pieces, and then each piece we want to say, well, how good could we make this one as we scale it up? And then how good could we make this one? And how crisp could we keep this one? And so on. So each of these squares is going to get a little bit of help from its neighbors. How many neighbors? That's something you control, right? You can say, when you go here to analytical upscale, you can say the block size, how big these blocks are. You have a starting point somewhere, an anchor point, if you will, maybe something down here, that pixel, and then it's an 11 by 11 by default, so 5 up, 5 down, plus the one where you're on, you have a total of 11 pixels. We have a square of 11 by 11 pixels, and you can look for, using bigger tiles, but then also the search distance. That's the one here. That's where you can say, well, how far do I want to look in the sense of the neighboring squares of the same tile size, same block size, right? So I have a block of maybe 15 by 15, and I'm looking only very nearby. Then it's not going to spend a whole lot of time, right? Let's try that, something like this. And let's do the 2 times. You can actually do that 2 times in a row, so 4 times bigger. It does a 2 time and then another 2 time. But this is probably going to be good enough for what we have as a final size. Let's go OK that. And that was 20 and a 15 by 15 block size. So search distance 20. And so what it does is it slices, like with the motion prediction module, it slices the entire image into small blocks of 15 by 15. At the middle, at the center of that block, it puts that's the position from where it's then going to look around in a search distance of up to 20 pixels to see is there anything else that's similar or can give additional clues about what to not lose along the scaling, the resampling, what to keep adding there, do a convolution filter operation, sharpening, whatever it is. There's some additional behavior there. Massive amounts of calculations. If you look at your task manager here, Control Shift Escape, you can go to the performance and make sure here you change the graph to show the logical processors. And I do have 12 cores here, 12 logical cores. So you can see they're all at 100% now. It's super high busy. And it's multi-threaded. That's why it is busy, because we make this go over multiple parallel threads. If I'm not mistaken, that can go up to 64 threads. I'm not really sure. Maybe Dan has made some changes to go even higher. But if you have a 32 core machine or a 64 core machine, or 32 with 64 threads as they call it on AMD, or if you have the logical cores here on an Intel processor, you're going to see this thing get really busy. And of course, heating up a little bit. It's a good idea to run this during the winter, cold winter months. Just kidding. You should have plenty of cooling on the fans, but yeah, you may hear the fans kick up a little notch because it is producing a lot of calculations here. All right, so once that picture is done, we'll store it, and then we'll try 2 or 3 other options. Right? We can say, well, search farther away, and see that might be useful. For example, for this patch up here in the upper right, over his what's that part? The chin, the eyebrows. I mean, it's before the ear, and this part here looks kind of similar to the part coming out of the ear and also on the other ear, and so it might gain some extra information there that helps it keep it crisp and not lose too much of the fine detail. And that's ultimately what we're trying with this, right, is to do a resample, upscale, upsizing if you will, but without losing the crispness of the image, if that is at all possible. And there are scenarios where this is coming out really well. For example, if you have patterns like these that are repetitive, and they are sometimes, like Dan mentioned in one of his videos, there is sort of the fractal nature of nature, so to speak, and it's going to keep it. Okay, let me store this one. So now here's a comparison before and after. Wait, is it? Yeah. So here's this one. Here's that one. It's very subtle. You may not see much of a difference until you know what? I didn't see any difference. Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah. So you see, here is the original, the simple resampling. Well, it was by cubic. It wasn't bad to begin with. It's a challenge to do better. But we do have a little bit better here. If you look around here. Yeah, you can tell it's a little bit crisper. Now it has a little bit more of a blocky appearance. Sometimes that's the same as crisper. This is a little bit smoother. You can see how it kind of washes it out here a little bit. Whereas here you have it a little bit tighter. That's the type of detail that you will get with the supersampling, right? Or with the algorithmic, the analytical upscale. It's going to give you this instead of that. It's very subtle. It's very, very fine. Sometimes you can barely see or agree that it's really worth the wait time. But there are times where this is going to be really... Okay, you can have this. or you can have this. Right, which one do you want? And then sometimes you use that actually to create more of a cartoony effect, right? Because it might increase the curve here for the contrast, and then so a little bit darker, a little bit brighter suddenly, and it looks crisper, but it also flattens it a little bit on the inside. It might get you that, and sometimes that's intentional, right? Sometimes that's desired, and you actually want to use it for more of a cartoony look. But let's try some others. Let's go back to this original here and try just different settings from what we had earlier. So this time still image analytical upscale. This time we'll keep it a little bit farther in terms of where to look, but make the block size a little bit smaller. Let's say 7 by 7. And the quality, we'll keep it at that. We'll also do a comparison with the two options here. We have a pixel level quality and a patch level quality. I'm not sure exactly how to describe that. Maybe there's a tooltip. Nope, not yet. So maybe we need that added. But the point is that we have a couple of things to try, and which one to choose or which way to go is something you'll probably over time understand what's the best choice. We can't necessarily, I cannot guess yet. I haven't used this enough to know for sure whether it's the pixel level or the patch level quality that I'm looking for. So it'll be a matter of trial and error, right? And try this with smaller images first, so that when you go into the parameters that take seemingly infinite amount of time, you don't have to wait too long to actually get to those results. But let me see this one, and yeah, here's definitely one that's going to take a little bit longer. You can see the progress bar is there, but it's moving only very slowly. So I'm going to pause the recording, and then I'll come back when it's almost done. All right, so we're almost done here. This took about, what, 3-4 minutes? And there we are. Okay, so we have this picture now to compare to the prior one. So I'm going to store this one too. And so we have this one, we have this one, we have the first one here that was done with regular sampling. So let's zoom in again, and this time let's take a look at another detail, those whiskers. Let's see, this one here, this long whiskers. Let's see if we can see any difference on that one. All right, so here is the version from regular sampling, and here is slightly different approach. And so if you zoom in, so here is the regular, I think by cubic sampling. Here is the one of the super samples. Here's another one. Not much difference between this. Maybe this is the one that I like best. It keeps it crisp, but it doesn't make it too blocky. This one here is a little bit too blocky, for my taste anyway. I mean, that's where you'll see, in some pictures you won't have these long whiskers or fine striature or details, and others it will be the perfect choice here. So here is not bad scaling. It's much faster, and quite often that's good enough. But then sometimes you'll see a little bit of extra crispiness there that might justify waiting for it a little bit. Like here, when it's a little bit blurry or not really that much contrast, but still you can suspect there are a few hairy details here. This might be a place where it might also be worth doing that. So let's take a look at these whiskers. It's like almost you're going to the eye doctor. Better, same, worse. And you gotta compare the two. And sometimes if you want to compare the two in sort of a continuous panning mode, look around, but keep comparing, what you simply do is you put them together into an animation. Right? So yeah, let's say you wanted these two to go together into an animation. So you create an animation, you say you just want these two, and you have in the first frame you want this one, click that, then you go to the second frame, and let's say you want this one. So now you have two different images in those two different frames, right? And then you just play it, and maybe at intervals, this is too fast initially, you can see it's going really fast. It's barely showing in the detail. Oh, there you see, it's 30 frames or 24 frames a second. Just make it two frames per second, or maybe even one if you want a little bit more time to think about it. But this Scintillation is a term they use in astronomy to detect the presence of a pulsar or moving elements in stars, like a field of stars where everything is about the same. You take a picture, wait a day, take another picture of exactly the same, line them up to make sure pixel star by star is matching, and then you'll see nothing change except if something has changed in the second picture. And so here you have a similar effect. If you want it to actually show as a scintillation, maybe you put it into 10 frames a second, and then you'll see that blinky nature. That will get your attention, right? That's how cats notice the movement of a mouse that they want to go hunt. Is that when something changes, especially lateral movement sideways, their eyes with their vertical pupil, their eyes are very sensitive to horizontal side movement. Whether it's a bird that's landing and therefore close enough to become lunch, or a mouse or a rat that's running, the side movement is what the cats detect quite easily. You can go up and down and they may not even look at you. If you move your hand up and down over the head, they may not even notice or want to make the effort to follow it. But when it's going sideways, left to right, you'll probably notice that they're getting very interested. So anyway, that's some of the techniques you can use to see whether there are alternate ways to scale it up. Now let's see where do you really want to do that, right? Not this picture necessarily, because this one was pretty high resolution to begin with. What we're looking at is more something that's a low resolution, maybe a very small subset of the original, right? So if I go back to my pictures that I have here, there's one here, same character. I don't know. Oh, let's see if we can maybe take this one here. In fact, just the bird. So I'm gonna go and focus on this dude, and then even make that a little bit smaller. But let's see if I can place that right here. Place it right, and actually, I need to place it in here in a way that it replaces the animation. And so now we have this, and in fact, I'm gonna make it even smaller than that. I'm gonna crop to a portion like roughly like this. Right, so sometimes you have that and you want to simply, let me move the selection down a little bit. With the control key you can move the selection. Let's go actually select it about from here to here, right? You want the eye, you want the beak, you want a portion, a small portion. And let's say you want to turn that into a tattoo artwork, or you want to print it on a coffee mug, or you want to put it on a t-shirt, or put it in a game. In the video game, you have an asset that needs this picture, whatever it represents, as a texture. And it's small, but it's the only one you have access to, right? So if I crop to this selection, that's the starting point. So I'm going to store that, and this is a pretty small one, because if I restore that, you can see the size. Oh, that's it. Actually, it's not that small, but it's small, right? And now the question is there any way to make it not lose? See how we see the pattern there, because it's in fabric. We see a little bit of a pattern. Let's say we want to keep that. Well, if we scale it up with the regular sampling method, it's probably going to lose some of that. Right? So if we do a resample, especially if we don't take the bicubic plus, but if we take the bilinear, and maybe we say make it 4 times bigger, so click that double size twice, you're still going to see some of it, but it may be a little bit washed out. And you may want to retain more of that fine detail. Right? So again, store that. We did 2 times 2, so 4 times bigger altogether. And so what I'm going to do now is load this original one back in. And this time we'll do, again, the resampling with the analytical upscale. Right? So this one here, the analytical upscale, let's take... I don't know what distance to go for. We need to experiment with this a little bit, right? So let's take a smaller number here, and block size, let's take the bigger block size, 15 by 15 pixels. Let's do it twice, 4x, right? So here we go. So it's a smaller starting point, and especially the search distance, we're not going everywhere. So we have a first pass and then we have a second pass. 4x will do a first one and a second one. 2x, 2 times will only do a single pass. So two times it'll be 2 times bigger on the width and the height, 4 times more pixels resulting from that. And the 4 times will be 16 times more pixels, right? 4 by 4. So here we go. Still fast enough to actually do this in real time. It'd be nice to have this on GPU someday if it's imaginable. But yeah, now you can see it's a little bit crispier. Now you might say it's blocky looking, but well, yeah, but that's the detail. That's the nature of keeping it crisp by sharpening it. So let's store this one and compare the two. Here's the one that's just the regular sampling, bilinear in that case, and here's the more crisp looking with the upscaling. There you go. There you go. Right, and so here's where you might, decide based on that whether you prefer the slightly blurry look or whether you prefer the crisper appearance of this one. Again, put that into a short animation if you want to look through and scale or pan through the entire animation. So let's make it just 2 frames. And in the first frame we put this one in, or this one actually, and then let's see what we down here, and then the second one we put the second one here. Okay, that's the crispy one. So now we have an animation, and we'll do 10 frames a second, or we'll do even fewer, let's say 2. And so now you can zoom in while it's doing the animation. Use the Control and Shift key to pan around, or use the little hand icon here to move it around. And so you just click and drag that icon. Right, the moment you click on that icon and drag, it's following the mouse. It's centering it to the center of the screen, and then you can. Or I like to use the Control Shift key, so I can just with the mouse let go and take a look at the eye. So you can see once much crisper, right? That's the difference from the analytical upscale. It's that it's keeping you a little bit more on the crisp side, and it's not always what you want, but when it is, then it's probably worth the wait for that analytical upscale. All right, so we've done this one. Let's go free this animation. There it is, and then we'll do one more. We'll do this one here. Make sure that we rescale, we replace it with the original here. And so this time I'm going to go with one more option. There's a few more to explore, but here's the analytical upscale again, and then this time we'll do a very small size, 5 by 5, but we'll go far to look for the best candidates. Right. And that's probably also going to be quite a time-consuming endeavor. We'll do that, and we'll come back as soon as it's done. Oh my, no, look at that. It's actually pretty fast. And the reason is that the block size is so small that it doesn't really doesn't need to spend that much time on finding the best candidates. Within a large search distance, it will be done still finding it pretty quick. So that's an interesting surprise there, and it's really testimony to the fact that there's a lot of numbers involved here, and you can't necessarily assume things are linear. There's a lot of learning to do, and the moment you increase that block size, it seems like it's more sensitive to that. And then there's also, we should do a comparison with just the quality. Given a particular distance and the block size, what's the quality going to look like? All right, so this one here we're going to store. Then we're going to, first of all, we don't need these guys anymore here. Sorry, kitty cat. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Get rid of this one, get rid of this one. Okay, so we've stored those. I think we stored this one. Let me just double check. Yeah. So now I'm going to go and restore this one more. And this time with the image analytical upscale, This time what we'll do is switch to, we leave the parameters the same, right? We have still the same search distance, we have the block size still 5 by 5, but instead of a patch level, this time we'll do pixel level, and we'll see what that does. Is that faster? Is that slower? I think it's a little bit slower than what we just had, but it's not significantly slower, at least not in this particular setting. So that's interesting. We can now then we'll wait for the actual result of that picture and compare to see which one we like better, block size or patch or pixel level for the quality. It seems like this is a little bit slower, hopefully with better results. You can see here there's the bearded vulture has a beard. And actually, I'm not sure if that's the beard that's giving it its name. It may have something on the sides as well, little pockets. But anyway, this is a bearded vulture that my brother films and takes pictures of. And as seen in the Alps, the mountains in Switzerland. And this was printed on fabric. So that's why we see this granular background. It seems like a pattern because it was printed on a pattern of fabric. So that's why we see this here, and we like to keep seeing that after scaling it up. Now, of course, there's those who will say, no, I'd like to get rid of that. Can we not get rid of that pattern? There are actually ways to do that, and I'll explore some of that before doing a video. But there's a couple of ways to try to remove the fine changes, like these patterns from the fabric, without removing the coloring or blurring the coloring too much, right? The combination of low pass and high pass filters and maybe something else. For example, sometimes if you think outside the box, instead of having just one image, if you have 2 or 3 images in a row and you move them slightly, you move them off by half a pixel or a pixel or so, then maybe it can detect where there's the most difference based on the contrast, the border regions of those pattern elements, and you can subtract those or remove those. There's perhaps some ideas to explore on that side. All right, so here's this one. Let's see what that compares to. Here's one, here's another. So this one was patch level, this one was pixel level. It seems like the pixel level is a little bit better, at least in my books, but everybody has a different opinion of what means what's the better. Anyway, here's some others, and here's the slightly blurry appearance of the very first bilinear interpolation, just regular scaling. So now, when you look at this, for instance, here, it's not easy to find some details here anymore, right? Whereas here you do see a little bit more of a ridge, and here also, and here perhaps an even better one. Compare this one to this one. Right. Again, I'm going to put that into animation, create an animation of just 2, or we could 3 or 4. Since we have 3 or 4 different versions here, we can say put all 4 together. And so we go to the first frame right here and put this one in there. Go to the second frame, put the second one in there, put the third frame here, and the last one here. That's the one we already had in there. Alright, so now we have 4, and we can play the animation and make sure we play it at 10 frames a second, or maybe 1 frame, 2 frames a second. So now as you zoom in, you get to see a variety of results, and you get to choose which one you like best. And you're not stuck with just these choices either. I mean, you can obviously run the whole analysis again and again with slightly different parameters. But what if you have 2 that you like very well, but they're both a little bit off, but both the 2 that are closest to what you're seeking? One thing you could do is do a motion interpolation, right? Motion estimated interpolation between the 2. Because there is motion here, as you can see. If you choose one and the other, for example, I'm going to choose the first one here and the last one. And I want to do something in between. So I'm going to delete this frame, cut this frame, and this one here too, cut this frame. So I have just these 2 frames. I'm going to repeat the last one here. So I'm going to copy this frame and insert it once. So now I have this one here, and then I have 2 times this one. I think that's how I set it up for motion estimated interpolation. Let's just go store this original animation to disk, and we might need it again. And so now I'm going to go to that motion estimated interpolation. So that's under the animator category, right here, motion prediction module. And keep in mind, these are fairly large images, so don't go overboard here with 2 million frames. Let's do a dry run first and say we need about, I don't know, roughly 100 tweens, and see what happens to that. So if we do it's a dry run, it's not going to actually save it or allocate memory to keep it. Let's do a go. Do we want drop frame? We can actually uncheck that. Good. Okay, so 124 frames for the interpolation. So now what you see is it's calculating a transition by doing exactly the same thing or similar, right, to what we saw earlier during the upsampling, which is it's slicing it into small tiles or small squares, and you can see the squares right here. Right, so you can take, I think 12 by 12 is a good usual size, and then you can say, well, how far do we want to look for even better squares, right? And there is a mode, cartoon mode might be interesting in some cases. Scan for drop frames, no, not needed, and go. All right, so let's assume this is not too big to fit into the animation. We should actually check for that, right? If we look at under the animation menu and whatever the current dimension is, if we say create a new animation, it will tell us how much memory it needs here, roughly 300 megabytes for 30. So I think this will fit into 2 gigabytes too. If you do 123 frames or tweens, which is going to probably result in about the same number, maybe 2 or 3 more frames. So just to be safe, maybe 130. That will still be less than 2000 megabytes or 2 gigabytes. So we should be good. So I'm going to go with 123 and uncheck the dry run and go. So now it's actually doing this calculation of motion estimated interpolation. You can see some slight movement. It's very subtle, and it's already done. So that's also multi-threaded, and it's on the fast side. So now you can see that it's doing an animation, but it's very subtle. But if you oh wait, no, it didn't do it. I had it wrong. Okay, let me do that. I don't remember. Let me replace the animation. That's why it's good to store it so you can get back to it easily. Remember how I duplicated the last frame here? I needed only these 2, but the algorithm for the motion estimation is in need of 2 frames initially. I'm not sure exactly why, but that's the way I found it to work. So I need actually this frame to be replicated here. So we have it twice. Copy this frame and replace current frame. So now we have 2 times this one and then 1 time this last one. Let's zoom in. Blurry, blurry, crisp. Good. So let's store that and store the animation. That's really what I wanted to store. This one I don't need anymore. This one is the one I want to keep just in case I also want to go back to that. And so now, with no further ado, animated motion prediction module, still remembering the parameters that we had initially, and ready to go. Oh, by the way, this is interesting too. If you want to see the motion vectors that it detects, right? You can show an arrow, you can show the motion vectors, and go. So it's going to be time consuming, but educational too. And it didn't do much, so let's do that again. Undo, show. Let's not do that, and just do it. Oh, wait, silly me. It's only 3 tweens. I need to do 123. There you go. Okay, now we have it. So now it's doing the calculations, allocating the memory after halfway, and storing it. There you go. I think that's at this point we should have an animation of sorts. If you take this, yeah, you can see very subtle, right? But on one end it's kind of blurry, on the other end it's not. So let's see if we can actually see a movement here. Let's go to the last frame. Did I still do it wrong again? Oh my god, I think I still did it wrong. Where do we go to the next frame? Right here. Yeah, I think I messed it up again. Okay. Let's do that again. Okay, first frame. Let's double check here. We have a first frame here, second frame here, same, and then the crispy one. I want to say that's how I'm supposed to do that. So let's go animation, excuse me, filter, animated, motion prediction module, and we'll do 3 frames, no, 123, search distance, grid spacing. Oh, maybe the fudge factor. Maybe force it to do a little bit better. So let's give it down to 1 or 0. We could do a first pass as a dry run and then a final one with the refinement. Okay, let's take a look at that. Now we see some movement. See how it initially starts blurry and then gradually gets crisper? Right? So if we do now the same thing with the dry run, refinement pass, and not a dry run, there. Good. Okay, so now if I take that, yeah, now we see the first frame is actually a copy of the last frame. If you go to the last frame, you shouldn't see any difference. But then you go here, it's the beginning. So now I can delete that first frame, and there we go, and play that. Oh, and it wasn't showing much animation because I was still only at 2 frames a second. It's going too slow at that point. All right, so make it 25. Now you see a little bit of movement. Now you see how it's starting blurry and gradually get crisper. All right, so we're back in business. We're back where I wanted to go with this is to say, well, I have 2 images. One is a little bit blurry and the other one is a little bit crisper, but it's too crisp, and I want something in between. All right, now you can do that something in between in a couple of ways. This is the motion estimated interpolated way. You can do a motion estimation, so now you can go from left to right, blurry, not blurry, and say somewhere in between is what you think is the best. There. Scroll here to see it. That's your frame. That's the magic. All right, so that's one way to do it. Another way would be to superimpose them, both images at the same time. And that could be even an animation if they are actually moving. But let's say you have a static image. I'm going to go and store this animation just in case I want to go back to that. Store to disk. And this time I'm going to load the images into, you could do that in 2 different layers, right? You could go, so I'm going to go free the animation free. Don't need this anymore. There you go. So we have the animation number there, this one or this one, this blurry one, and then this crisp one, or this one actually. And we wanted to, these are the same. So let's say we wanted to have this one in one layer and this one in another layer, and then do a combination of the 2. Right, so there's a couple of ways to do that. Well, one is to actually use layers. So you click this, go to the upper or the lower level, and you can then load, let's say into this one, you load the slightly blurry one, and here you load this one. Now the 2 are already being combined. That's why it gets pretty dark here. They're being multiplied together. Right, so there's a couple of ways you can change that. Here's the default, and you can change to say, well, I want them in screen mode. So that's that's the bottom one. That won't help. Here, the bottom one, it doesn't have anything below. But the upper one here, there you go. So by default, it's a multiply mode. You see here, multiply or default, same thing. But you do have a couple of other ways to combine these, right? The screen one comes to mind. That's where you can you can have them both kind of present at the same time. Now, sometimes it's going to be brighter than you want it, so you may want to reduce the level of that screen. The level of that layer. Right? You see here some values for the options, and well, that's just the size of these. But there's also the value here of how much opacity to give to that particular layer. And then the rest comes a little bit more dominant from the layer underneath it. So, and you could also do another layer here, right? You could add another one and move that one down, and then make that one actually a dark one. Erase it to black, and then this one here, the in between, this one here, you could adjust how much of that you want to see. So the layer underneath it, which is a dark one, will also gain a little bit more impact. Right, so there's a couple of ways to combine these things, and certainly I would encourage you to also see if you see something like this, right? You can like the vivid light or the color burn. Some of these will give you perhaps more of what you're looking and seeking. So that's with the layers. So where's the vivid light? There, this one here. Maybe adjust a little bit the brightness. Look at that, nice contrast there. And then the bottom one, or this one here rather, let's see if we, yeah, you can really get some interesting results with that, combining those things, right? So, and then once you have that, you can flatten it all into one. All right, so that's another way to combine them together. Right. And then there is one more, which is instead of using this technique with the layers, you can put them in two different places. One, we call that the swap image, the swap buffer. So there is sort of the backside of your canvas. Think about traditional media. You have a canvas or a sheet of paper, you paint on it, and then say, oh, now I'm done. I can't paint anymore. Now, of course, you can just turn it around and you have another one. Or you can paint on top of the existing one. That's kind of the layer technique. But the backside, if you flip it around, there is a S as in switch to the swap buffer right here. Right now, the swap image has nothing in it. So I'm just going to put one image there. And I'm going to switch back to this one and put the other image there. And oh wait, maybe I wasn't on the right image. So now I have the two. Yep, there it is. So I have two images, but I only see one right now. I see this one or this one. Right? Use the S for switching or jumping from the main image to the swap image. You can see here in the title bar next to Howler it shows swap. That's what I'm looking at right now. Click it and it's main. You can also use the keyboard shortcut just in case you've never done that. There is a jump to swap image, lowercase j. Right, so use J. You may need to have the keyboard focus. Maybe click on the gray area here. There you go. Now it has a keyboard focus. So I can use the J for jump to jump between. And so I'm gonna go get rid of this. Don't need this one anymore. So here's the thing, right? We have two images, one in the main image, the other one in the swap image. This one here is in the swap. This one is in the main. And we'd like to combine the two in some way. So one way you can do that is you have them both together like this, and then you go to the image, to the filter menu and say combine with swap. Right? And again, there's a couple of different ways that you could combine, like subtract one from the other, and you'll see just the differences. Now, sometimes you'll need to do some adjustment for the dynamic range so that it shows those differences a little bit better if they're very subtle. But that's an interesting option too. So what I'll do is I'll say, well, if we can see those two images together, how can we adjust so we see a little bit of one and a little bit of the other? That's called mix with swap. So here you can say I want this one or I want this one. This is the main image, this is the swap image. Right, so you can switch between the two as if you adjusted the transparency layer or level of a layer so that one sees shows a little bit of itself, and then below the next layer shows the rest. Well, here you have a blending between these two, and that's one way you can do a combination. There's a couple of other options in that combine mode, right? You can find what's the complement to each other. You can find also there's displacing it. That can create some really interesting choices too. Right, so do a displace, and so the image in one will displace the other, and that's really something that you can explore to create marble textures and wood grain textures and other fancy patterns And so let's explore those a little bit. There, displays by swap. So you can see, depending on how much swap displacement you give it, and there may be some smoothing, and then there's some how to retain the material from the edge going back to the other side. So you don't clamp it usually, right? You don't want that. You typically will want to mirror it back in. There's a couple of other ways to displace it. Let's go and explore what their merits are. Displace by swap here, cloaking displace. That may introduce a little bit of discoloration here, cloaking colors. Not my favorite, but it has its merits in some cases. It's cool if you want to do something that looks a little bit science fiction-ish. You go into a cloaking invisibility, and there's a little bit of a discoloration visible. But let's see this one here. The pool displays is probably one of the stronger ones. The pool display, you can see just a tiny little bit of the value, and then here pool displays, and that's really one of the better ones if you want to create marble textures and other really interesting patterns like these here. Looks like some oily flows. Let's in fact add to that. Let's do the same filter again. Where is it? Displaced by pool displays. And so you can see how it's doing it really. And some of these, by the way, are you can animate, right? So you can create an animation so you actually see this flow in the animation. Right? You do that here from the. You first need to create an animation placeholder, and then you go into the timeline editor for that, and you can keyframe the amount of displacement. Let's just do 2 or 3 more. Displaced by the jitter display. That's going to create a bit of a jittery pattern look, which at times is interesting too. If you want to use this for elevation maps, these patterns here will look, these jittery patterns will look a lot like some rocks standing free from the plateau. Let's see one more. Filter displays by, so we have the color twirl and the normal displays, and these are very respectable too. Very interesting effects that you can get with those. And so I highly recommend exploring these. They're super fast and fun to try. And let's keep that one. And then we'll do one more, which is the displays, normal displays. Now that one is a little bit more time. Oh no, actually we've recently enhanced it in speed. It's real time now. It used to be you had to let go before you saw the result, but it's super fast now. And so let's see what we have here. Of course, a very different picture than we started from with all these manipulations. There is one more thing we can do between the swap image and the other is embossing it by swap. So you can add an emboss effect from one image against the other. Right, the main image is what we're looking at, the colors and so on, but the image that's in the swap is going to be used for embossing. Plus you can also change the direction of that light source that controls which way that embossing will be showing. And so that's that. I think we've spent about an hour here recording. I think we'll call it a day. Have a great weekend, explore, be creative, and have fun.